and then really open it up to a broader question and answer session going forward. Also, I guess relevant news for this group is the PA notice that went out yesterday. I'm wondering if some people in the room are aware of that and other people aren't. I think it might be useful if everybody was aware of that news. So rather than a show of hands, I just want to at least characterize it as I understand it. There's a notice from, I think, all of the lead vendors saying that the policy decision of the Mass Save program administrators is that contractors cannot at the same time be in HES and be in this pilot program. I know there's a couple of folks from Eversource here. If I get this wrong, I'll look to you to clarify. Obviously, there's some concern from the PAs about having contractors in both programs at the same time. I wouldn't claim to fully understand that, but I think that's their prerogative as program administrators to make that choice. And so we will work with that. But I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of that, because I'm guessing not everyone is on their current mailing list. How are we doing on the technical side?
Charlie can hear us, so that means people can hear us. Yeah, we can get started.
Did anybody that's online share that they could hear us?
Well, yeah, you can ask them. I type in a question if you can hear us. I don't have any volume. I'm not hearing the beginning. It's 2:11. Well, some people can't hear us. So I'm not sure whether if you stand here and talk. Well, let me.
So I'm going to ask if anyone on the webinar can hear Ian speaking. That's me. Or Lawrence speaking. And hopefully we'll get an answer. Although if they can't hear the question, then we won't get an answer.
Yeah.
Right.
Is it possible to shut the lights? Make it bigger or shut the lights?
Yeah.
Rather than yelling,
Is that better?
yeah. Can't read the top lines too well. Oh, that's bad.
And we can we make the screen more full screen, Lawrence? I don't think do you need all that?
Yeah, let me give me a chance here. I think it is full screen.
I think that red arrow you can click on.
Oh.
Not the other one.
This one. Okay.
I don't think anyone on the call from here. At least I have someone in my office who's trying to listen to the time. I'm not sure if you guys have got confirmation.
So, Lawrence, it looks like the volume here is on me. Can you click on this? And maybe that will help. Do you want to ask if people
can people hear? They may have to type in the text box if you can hear. Charlie said he could hear upstairs, so I don't know. He said he could hear us.
Right. You can tell we do this all the time.
Hello?
Hey, Larry, it's Charlie.
Well, I don't
Yeah,
want to
I can hear you.
much more time, so I think we'll start in a minute regardless.
I hear
we may be
you.
able to record and then post the webinar with
No, it's not the volume.
Should be
Um,
solution.
Computer audio happens when you take something. I can hear you now. Yeah. Was hearing Ian. Is he still talking? No, I can hear him now.
So I know before we get started that Paul Johnson wanted to say a few words, so maybe this is a good time. Are you willing?
Yeah, yes. Okay, so,
Why don't you stand up, Paul?
right. So, obviously, we're here to get the details on this program. I think the questions to ask are, will it meet some of its goals? I think I've sent the strong proposal to everybody, and
Can you hear us now?
the goals are
Charlie?
to get more customers, deeper savings, and to reduce costs.
Well, he's not talking now.
In terms of more customers.
But you hear me over the phone.
Opening up to.
I mean, over the broadcast.
Contractors outside the Mass Save program, that could bring in more customers.
Yeah.
By minimizing barriers,
Yes, I
like
can
now
hear
it's
the
required,
broadcast.
that could bring in more customers.
Okay, somebody else is talking.
And by adding new measures, that could
Can you
bring in
move closer to
customers.
the computer, you
Now, the
think?
straw poll seems to be
No,
doing,
you're good.
identifying,
Okay.
addressing
You're
those
clear.
things.
Okay.
In terms of deeper savings, can we get the customer to put in more money? I mean, right now,
Any
they're
questions
55%,
on,
but if you want to get deeper savings, you gotta get these customers
Yeah,
to
the thing is that,
invest more of their own money in it. So maybe by
still not hearing
using that,
anything.
maybe
No
by
one's gotten back.
having these new measures, the
That's
customers
strange you
more
can hear us, but
inclined
he
to
can't.
put
They
their own
can't.
money in. And maybe by opening up to other
Um,
contractors, they might find markets that.
Because there are
people
43
more
people on the
interested in putting
phone.
their own money in. And finally, reducing costs, well,
I don't-
the question is the oversight and administrative efforts,
Okay. All right,
are they
thanks.
adequate? Can we do it without that much administrative costs? So anyway, the question is, will this
Okay.
will
Yeah,
this
you
plan,
just sent a message to all, can you hear us now?
and
So I wouldn't mess with
secondly,
anything.
if I were a lot of you people,
Whatever you did before,
what
is
any
tough to work.
impact will it have on the current HES program? So,
Opposite mouse click if you want to.
and then the customers, will it
The
discourage
tenant's still on
contractors? Will it
hold.
confuse
Maybe that's what it is.
contractors? Will it confuse the customers and maybe tarnish Mass Save brand?
The broadcast
So,
is now starting.
you have to ask,
All
will
attendees
this
are in listen-only mode.
Can it do these things without having negative impact? Then finally, the question is, how could this pilot be improved to achieve these goals that were outlined and maybe some other goals that you might have? And will it actually work? I mean, what steps need to be taken? What do we see as the barriers to having this happen? I mean, it's a complicated thing, it's completely new, and implementing it might be really difficult. So I think identifying what those problems would be and how to achieve, overcome them is another thing we have to think about. So anyway, this should be pretty interesting. All right, thanks.
Thanks, Paul. And Lawrence is telling me that they can hear us. So hopefully that's true, and we're going to just assume they can start anyway. So can we go to the first slide? And as I said before, if you have clarifying questions as we go through, wave or shout or something, and we'll pause there. So, I mean, I think the core question that we've been asked is, why would we do a pilot? Why would we pilot something different than HES right now? This is not necessarily news, but I thought it was worth reiterating at the start. We think that the current HES program is very good. It's designed to deliver at scale, and Massachusetts does better than any other state in the country at delivering a residential audit program at scale. That doesn't mean, however, that it's perfect. And we've been hearing more and more from contractors through public forums like the EEAC and offline conversations that there's some frustration with some elements of the program. So a commitment was made with the current 3-year plan for DOER to take on a residential contractor working group. And some of the things that came out of that, even from very early on in that group, there was clear interest in us testing something different. So that's what we're doing. That doesn't mean that the existing program is going to go away or crumble or die, but we do think that it's worth looking at an alternative delivery model with the potential that that could run alongside the current program or influence the redesign of the current program or not, depending on how it works out. Some of the things that we heard as clear concerns were a little bit of lack of flexibility in the program design, a lot of comments about complexity and the time-consuming nature of data collection and delivery. Some of those things are unavoidable with a program like that, but we're trying to address things a little differently in our proposed pilot. And then another factor which I think is relevant, and maybe you're all aware of, is that residential programs, not just in Massachusetts but across the country, have been quite dependent on lighting savings for the last few years. And assuming that federal standards don't change, the expectation is that those lighting savings are going to diminish greatly in terms of what can be claimed by utility and program administrative programs. We'll still all be using LEDs in our homes, but there won't be necessarily savings beyond the minimum expected standard from installing those. So for all those reasons, we thought it was a good time to put some of our money, not Mass Save money, but state money, into testing some innovation. So that's the intent behind this pilot on that front. In terms of how we looked at what should we test, if you can go to the next slide. Obviously, we're going to be influenced by the HES program in Massachusetts. It's a very mature, established program. It's evolved itself over several years. It's the program that we know, so it's going to be our reference point. But we also went and brought in experts from Oregon and California. The Oregon program was also somewhat working in Washington State as well. But these two West Coast programs seem to us to have moved towards a more performance-based program. And we're getting a lot of attention, and still are getting a lot of attention, as relatively innovative models for program delivery. That said, when we presented them to the working group, and some members of the working group are here, it wasn't necessarily an overwhelming sense of, yes, we should do exactly what they're doing. So I think that we evolved more of a Massachusetts-specific pilot influenced by these programs. Also, in that process of looking at these programs, if we can go to the next slide, we looked closer to home as well. And we had conversations with the program administrators and our energy office equivalents in Maine and Vermont as well. Now, we chose Maine and Vermont because they had more contractor-led models, and the working group had already kind of steered us in that direction. Maine in particular has a number of elements to their program model that we felt were worthwhile testing in this pilot. That said, what both Maine and Vermont said to us is that their program model works in their relatively small state where they have relatively modest budgets. So they were not saying to us these programs can replace HES. What they were saying to us was, if you're going to do a contractor-led delivery model, then we do that, and it does work for the markets that we serve. We could go into more detail on those, but I think we'll keep going for now and get to some of the features from those programs. So to summarize in kind of 4 bullets what our proposed pilot looks like, we came out with an approach that is contractor focused. We'll go into more depth on that. But very much soup to nuts, it's the contractor's relationship with the customer rather than the current HES model where the lead vendor is the front end of the program in most cases, or the home performance contractor's auditor, and then the contractors are coming in behind, maybe once the scope has already been set, and doing that work. So that's why we characterize it as contractor focused. It's open pricing as well, which is quite a big shift from the Massachusetts model. In most states, they do have open market pricing for their programs. And so it was fairly easy to find examples of that. And then with that, because the contractor is the interface with the customer, I think that also shifts things like liability onto the contractor. We also wanted to look at a performance-based program where we're looking at actual bill savings as well as modeled energy savings or prescriptive energy savings. And doing that not on a sort of sample evaluated after the fact, but on every home in the program. That doesn't mean that your incentive is influenced by the behavior of every household in the program. We didn't think that was fair on contractors because there are going to be a lot of anomalies. So we'll talk a bit more later on about getting a pool of households that you serve and looking at their bill savings over time. Obviously, with all of the different layers in the Mass Save program, we're really talking about swapping out the delivery model for HES. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't want contractors to take advantage of all the other elements that Mass Save provides. So there are rebate incentives for heating systems, for retail lighting, all the other things that you probably are well aware of. We would want those to be available to the pilot just as they are to any contractor now. One key piece, though, is that the HES program is currently the gateway to the heat loan financing. And we heard from a number of contractors that access to financing at 0% is fairly critical to selling a lot of the jobs that they do. And so we've committed in this pilot to provide an equivalent of the heat loan. And we're fortunate that DOER has a pool of funding that is currently funding the expanded heat loan. And we can make this pilot a recipient of those funds as well. So for folks who aren't familiar with the expanded heat loan, that currently pays for pre-weatherization work, things like novel tube mitigation or vermiculite or asbestos removal, so that a household can then go into the main Mass Save program. If you're not already aware of that and you run into that situation, we'd like you to use the program for that. But on top of that, we can add other measures. And so what we would want to do is essentially duplicate the Mass Save heat loan with the expanded heat loan for contractors that are in this pilot. We couldn't pay for the entire heat loan. That's a very big program now in the state. But on a pilot for 2 years, we can cover that cost. So a final piece of the performance-based approach that I didn't mention is that we also want to be able to give contractors feedback. We would keep that anonymous. We would let each contractor know how they're doing. Our thought was that we would publicize the top 3 in different categories. And then lastly, we think there are some innovations that will come to the HES program or probably on the way to the HES program. But just by virtue of starting a new program today, we can make sure we're adopting those best practices. Those include having software that's HBXML compatible, so that it's very easy to share data between your audit tool, the back office tool, and any other elements that might be needed for a smooth program workflow. We also got a lot of input about minimizing data entry in situations where you're working with a household and you don't want to spend a lot of time collecting data. So we have built in or plan to design in an option where you can do a minimal audit and still qualify for incentives and get work done. That might apply to situations where you're doing a larger project than just the energy efficiency scope of work, or maybe the nature of the client you're dealing with, or it may just be your way of doing business. So we included that. And we'll talk more about the use of real-time data as we go along. So, the next slide. In terms of how to describe moving to the contractor-focused program, the best analogy that we came up with was the famous quote from Mr. Reagan, again, then President Reagan, "Trust but verify." This is not to say that we view contractors as though they are Russians prior to the end of the Cold War, but I think this generally applies. We trust the workforce that has grown up in Massachusetts to supply weatherization and energy efficiency, but at the same time, when we're using public dollars, we have to verify where those dollars are going and that they're getting the results that we're looking for. So if you'll let us play this out, the next few slides will talk about that. And I don't want to imply that the HES program doesn't trust contractors. Obviously, you guys have built relationships over a number of years. But I think in our pilot design, we want to extend more trust. We're going to put more control in the hands of contractors than the current HES model does, just by virtue of the design of the program. So we are trusting contractors to be the ones who go out, identify the customers, find the customers, set the project scope for the work with your customer, set the project cost, and then the incentives that that project qualifies for would go to the contractor. Now, hopefully those incentives will affect the price that you offer the customer, and will probably notify the customer of the level of incentives that the contractors are receiving. But we still felt that that should be a negotiation between the contractor and the customer. We will be looking at the cost effectiveness of this approach, but we wanted to try it. Next slide. In terms of how you do the work, we want to really make that an open selection choice by the contractor. If you're the person assessing the building, if you're the person in the home, then in our view, you are the best placed to make a decision on how you're going to treat that house. If you want to do blown-in cellulose, then obviously that's going to make sense in a lot of cases. But if you want to do flash and bat, if you want to do mineral wool, if you want to do rigid or spray foam, we are going to leave that decision up to the contractors participating in the pilot. Presumably that will be influenced by the experience of your crew and the situation in the home. And we would want to move towards a situation where it's really a home-specific application, rather than having a limited set of options that you can offer the customer. Next slide. In terms of so that was the trust side of the equation. In terms of the verify side of the equation, again, the current programs have a lot of verification. Our goal with this pilot is to verify savings more quickly with more rapid feedback loops than the current system does. So we envision having a similar QA/QC process to the one that you would have right now through the HES program, where a certain percentage of jobs will get an inspection to check that the work is done, and blower door testing and so on. But in addition to that, we will be asking all homes participating in the pilot for the customer data on their electric and gas bill, or if their primary heating is some other fuel, on that fuel as well. It gets more challenging with oil or propane. Most customers are probably going to be gas and electric, but we will want to get that so that we can then look at both pre and post install, how was the energy use changing in that house. To us, that's critical feedback that if I was a contractor, I'd want to know the results, but also as a program administrator or the state energy office, we're interested in those results. And then to make this worth everyone's while, we want to offer a bonus if contractors are showing that they are doing well in those actual results after the fact. So, one more slide on verification. We want to provide participating contractors with useful feedback on how they're doing relative to their peers. So at the moment we have 3 metrics that we are thinking of using. We're pretty committed to using at this point. One is depth of savings. So how much energy savings per home are you getting with your approach? That's going to vary a little bit on the type of contractor you are, the type of customer that you're working with, and so on. But we do think it's a very relevant metric. Then actual versus model. So if you're using the modeled audit, and that's predicting savings ahead of time, and then we're truing that up with the utility bill, we will be looking at which contractors are doing better than the model predicted, about the same, or worse than the model predicted. I think that's going to tell us a little bit about the model and a little bit about the contractor. And so we thought that would be useful feedback. And then the cost of savings. Particularly for the larger HES program, this is a critical metric. And so in the pilot, it's very relevant to get information on that. So we'll be capturing what the total MMBTU savings are, and we'll be looking at the incentives put out and looking at what cost per MMBTU are we getting from different homes, different contractors. So those are currently our 3 key metrics. We'll be sharing those with all participating contractors on a one-by-one basis. And then for the top 3, our thought is that we make that public in the hopes that that's a useful marketing metric for different contractors. You can say we're in the top 3 in terms of depth of savings or cost of savings, and hopefully that's something that helps you market your company services. Okay, next slide. So the key innovations here in this approach, they're characterized in some ways, in some forums, as EM&V 2.0. We plan to do a more traditional evaluation on this pilot, but we will be looking to incorporate this idea of tracking fuel data, rapid feedback, and hopefully using that to inform program design and also contractor performance. If you're seeing that you're doing particularly well with one approach and less well with another approach, our hope is that it would change the way you are doing business, change what measures you're offering, and so on. Also, we're somewhat forced into having rapid feedback on this pilot program because we're interested in getting results that can inform the next 3-year plan. That doesn't mean that we have any role in writing the next 3-year plan. The 3-year plan is written by the program administrators, the utilities. We, as the Energy Office, chair a council that looks at those plans, but we don't write the plans. But we think that the primary value in doing a pilot program now is to get at least one heating season in before we're into planning the plans for 2019 to 21. Yeah. So, next slide. So I tried all kinds of jokes about 2 paths diverge in a wood. If anyone's got a good joke there, I don't. But our goal is to have 2 audit paths, but have them converge rather than diverge in terms of the savings that you would get at the end. So we're just going to explain that a little bit more. This slide, which we've shown before at Best Practices Working Group, is really a side-by-side, and we're going to, I know it's really small font, so we're going to dive in a bit more in subsequent slides. But the essential idea is that there is a simple audit and a more in-depth energy model audit. And as a contractor, you can pick either one. If you take the simple audit, you will get a fixed incentive, and it will be more modest in almost all cases than if you go for the modeled audit. But because we are collecting the billing data and tracking it for the following 12 months, there is the chance that you can do the simple audit and get the same amount of money in the end. You just have to wait that year to see the bill savings come in. So that's the idea of two starting points, but one final amount of energy savings. So if we go to the next slide. So the simple audit option, differences from the Mass Save program right now: no lighting required, no other instant savings measures required. If you want to offer people water-saving devices or smart strips or other things, we think those make a lot of sense, but that's your option. This is really focused around weatherization. There will be a minimal set of data that we need about the home, which is not the same as plugging in all the data for an energy model, and there will be a fee associated with that.
That's per unit?
Sorry?
Per unit? Per housing unit?
Per unit, yeah, per unit. There will be a flat rate incentive for air sealing, flat rate incentive for wall insulation, or attic insulation, or basement insulation. I guess to multifamily we may need to tweak that a little bit for certain configurations, but in most cases it will be a flat rate. This is taken straight from the program in Maine, where they've been operating this for several years. So to do a simple example where somebody did the simple audit, did air sealing, and did, say, wall insulation, that would just qualify for a $1,740 flat incentive. That said, assuming that you do a good job with those measures in a typical home, we would expect the savings to be worth more than that. So you would know going in up front that you would get this incentive, and you would be able to use that to sell the job to the customer or to affect your price to the customer. But assuming that, and you would only get that incentive if you can get the customer's approval to track their data to see what the actual results were. And then after 12 months, you would have the opportunity to get a bonus payment if the savings were higher than just that flat incentive implied. So next slide.
Is that in addition to the zero interest loan?
That's in addition to the zero interest loan. Yeah. Now the other option is much more like a current Mass Save audit in terms of it would require a full energy model of the home. We've spoken to, at this point, I think most of the software providers that do energy modeling through energy efficiency audit programs. And we're going out to bid on that very soon. So we'll try and get as contractor-friendly an audit program as we can. And so it will be much more similar to the Mass Save audit that you see now. Some differences, though. You won't have to do lighting or instant savings measures. That's a choice. In part, that's because we see the lighting element of these programs going away in the future. The measure mix, how you choose to treat the conditions, is between the customer and the contractor. We hope that you will do things that make a lot of sense from a building science perspective, and that giving you this control will lead to better building science outcomes rather than worse building science outcomes. Obviously, there will be QA, QC. If we see a contractor doing something that we think is contrary to the best interests of the customer, then we'll be talking to you about that. But our assumption is that in most cases the contractor will make a better decision about what's the best way to treat that house than the program, because you'll have more information, you'll be in the house. So the utility data collection will be required, and then the incentive, besides a fixed incentive for doing the audit and the blower door test, the rest of the incentive will be a sliding scale based on how much energy savings the model predicts you're going to get with the measures that you install. And so that's probably best illustrated by going back to the numbers.
Back.
But, well, no, let's keep going through the chain. So when we move to an incentive where the incentive is based on what your energy use was before compared to your energy use after, that aligns very well with the scorecard that we piloted in the past. This was, unfortunately, we've got the thing right in the middle of it, but this is the scorecard that was used a few years ago in the Springfield area. At that time, it was a pilot program with National Grid, Columbia Gas, and then Western Mass Electric, now Eversource, in 8 communities in Western Mass, where the software that generates the audit can automatically print out a scorecard that shows the total energy use before from all fuels, the recommended measures, and then how much they would reduce that total energy score. So we see this as being a good tool to explain to the customer what incentives they could qualify for. The first number is the total energy use of the home, in this case 160 MMBTUs a year. If you have a suite of measures that would reduce that by, say, 30 MMBTUs a year, then you can show the customer, okay, we'll be moving your house from being worse than average to around about average, and your incentive is based on that change. So we can provide more information on that if there's interest, but we plan to require the software providers of the energy model to have this type of scorecard capability so that you can print that out and show it to your customer as you're explaining the options to them in terms of how deep they want to go in terms of savings. And it will also calculate the expected bill savings for them as a result. Okay, next slide. So to give an example of how that might play out in a house, unlike the $40 minimal data fee in the simple audit, we would refund audit and blower door costs at $150, which is not so dissimilar to the current Mass Save audit fee. But then, let's say you did air sealing and spray foam the attic. So air sealing and an attic retrofit. If the model savings were about $2,500, then that's what you would receive as the incentive. We would still be tracking the data on the savings. And in this case, we would expect the true-up to be very similar to the model result. So you as a contractor could get an incentive, but you might not. Now, if the actual savings show up as less than the model predicted, then we're not going to claw back any money. You're still going to get the incentive that the model projected, but we're going to be tracking the portfolio of homes that you treat. And so it will affect whether you're able to get a bonus incentive from all of your work. So the reason to do that is to prevent a strong incentive for you to tweak the model to get the best possible upfront savings. You can do that, and for a while that will provide you with more incentive, but we'll be able to track how that's playing out over time, as will you. And it'll be something that, you know, if we see systematic abuse of, we'll have problems with.
Excuse me, so in this path here, the incentive is based essentially on 1 year payback or 1 year energy savings?
The incentive is based on expected energy savings on an annual basis, and we'll basically show you the price of that. So if we go to the next slide, I think it gets back to the numbers. Oh, okay, we'll get there.
Okay, no worries, sorry.
So, I mean, this is just walking through that same concept. So the idea is that because you've collected the utility data for the customer, we'll be able to compare actual meter savings, weather adjusted, to the modeled savings, which, because they're in the model, they're already weather adjusted. And then each home that you treat will either be better than the model or worse than the model, but you'll have a net savings number. And once you have 20 or more homes that you've treated, if you think that's a big enough sample to pay out an incentive. So let's say you get home number 20 in, and then wait a year, and you have net savings, then you can cash out those savings at any time. With a 2-year pilot, depending on how many homes you're doing, you might want to cash out after year 1 and then year 2. Or if you're not doing a lot of work, you could wait the whole period. It's a way of us truing up in a close to real-time basis. Every time a monthly bill comes in, we'll see, are your customers saving more energy than you expected or the model expected, or less energy than the model expected? And a lot of times on any individual household, there are going to be other factors going on, but with 20 or more households, a lot of that noise should even out. If you treat more homes, then it should even out more. Okay.
How do you intend to work with the data on the non-metered fuels? You know, some smaller homes might only have 2 or maybe 3 deliveries. Are you going to be really closely looking at heating 3 days against when they ordered their oil? Do they even have the records on their slips from when they got the oil? I mean, how accurate are non-metered is going to be very difficult,
Yeah. I mean, I think that we'll have a methodology for dealing with it, but we'll also give contractors the option to exclude them from their portfolio. So I think you may be a contractor that's serving a lot of oil heat customers, and then you wouldn't want to take them all out of your portfolio because then you wouldn't have any chance to get a bonus. But recognizing that it's going to be more error on those homes, we'll have an approach based on the billing data that you can collect. And then if you don't like that, you can just say, okay, I want to exclude that house from my portfolio.
But all that information is available through the oil company delivery.
Yeah, and our thought is that the first point of attack will be to try and get that information from the customer, but recognizing that's not always easy, what we've seen happen in Maine and Vermont is they get the oil dealer's information and they go to the oil dealer directly. And in many cases, that oil dealer is going to be serving several customers, and so it's a more efficient way to get that data. We recognize there's going to be some cost involved in getting that information, and that's something that we can probably take on as the program administrator's role to do if you, as a contractor, have exhausted the obvious options of getting it from the customer first. So yeah, it's a great question.
It comes down to just time. I mean, some, oil tanks 275 gallons. That might be so much, 50% of the usage in a year. Does the oil man top it off before you even need evaluation, or does it not? All right,
Right.
We're down to 1 gallon. All right, well, let's pull the data now, because that has got a ton of savings on the annual. Just, so it can be gained even though not here is tough to evaluate.
Right. It is. I mean, I think just as we would give you the option to exclude it from the sample, if we see what we think is gaming behavior, then we may choose to say you can't include those homes in your sample. But I think for oil and propane, it's going to be an issue. Question at the back?
Are contractors going to be required to go in-house, or will we be allowed to?
That is your prerogative. To the extent that you're subcontracting work out, you're still going to be judged on their performance. So, but that's your prerogative. Okay.
Sorry, savings are just heating savings, not cooling savings?
No, heating and cooling savings. And they can be plug load savings. We're going to be looking at the total energy use of the house. Lawrence?
Next slide.
Yep. So,
Is there a way to move that?
I was going to ask, is
Yeah, there is. Strictly speaking, there should be 2 different computers here, but it took so long to get one set up this morning that we weren't able to use 2.
So-
I apologize. We don't do it that often.
Yeah.
But I can't move it. I tried. I had my mouse on it. It stays there.
there are critical numbers behind here.
Yeah, sorry. I wish I could.
So,
Move the projector.
Yeah, there we
for
go.
folks on the webinar who hopefully can hear us.
They can see it, they can see it.
But I'll read them out. And we'll make the slides available afterwards as well. But our thought is that that essentially we want to price the savings similar to the cost of savings delivered through the HES program, so that you're in the pilot, you're getting compensated on average at the same rate as if you are in the HES program. But the incentive is for you to maximize savings, because that's what your incentive is going to be based on. So for any savings that are between 5% and 20%, which is going to be most jobs most of the time, we're planning to price that at $125 in MMBTU. Now, at the moment, I wouldn't expect you in your head to have a good idea of what $125 in MMBTU translates into. But we did some modeling based on results from 2015, I believe. And that seemed like a good comparison to the cost of savings to the program. Now, if you are working with a house and you're getting deeper savings than 20%, for that 20 to 40% savings, we would give you a higher cost per incentive per MMBTU. So it would go up to 150. And that's really to reward getting deeper savings from that customer's home. That's less marketing, less outreach, treating more of the home in one project.
I see. But the bonus on there is not really that much. I mean, if you do 20% or 25%, you're only going to get $100, right?
Yep.
So it's not that dependent on the savings. You're going to get like 95% of your money up front, and then you're going to get $100 if you do pretty good.
The idea is that essentially, if you do the full model, you should get the full incentive up front, give or take. It's going to, but if you are doing better work than average, the model is predicting the performance of an average contractor in an average home. So if you're doing better work than average, then you should be getting better savings than average once you average that out over a number of households.
Is that primarily based on the blower door?
Well,
Based on the meter.
the blower door is going to give you a sense of air sealing for the model. And then the model is going to predict savings based on the change in insulation. But we're going to be truing that up against the meter data. So again, if somebody is very good at gaming the model, then they're going to get a bigger upfront savings. But over time, we're going to see that there's some imbalance between model results and the actual results. So, I mean, we want contractors to focus on doing a good job and doing the work well, which I think is a good level playing field for people, as opposed to contractors spending a lot of time trying to figure out how do I game this model to get more savings, which you're all smart enough to do, but I think you'd all rather be doing better work in the field and getting paid for that than getting paid for figuring out how to tweak code in software. There's plenty of jobs in that if you want those. Yeah, so then if you get more than 40% savings in a home, then we would go up to $160 in MMBTU. So essentially the incentive is to persuade the customer to do all the work that makes sense for their home in one project. And that's why we thought it was important to be able to offer that zero interest loan up to $25,000 the same way that the regular massive loan does. Yeah, so recognizing the font is small, we just wanted to put those numbers out there. I can see us after a year or so of the program potentially revisiting those numbers, but we wouldn't do anything overnight. We would make sure that we are informing contractors of that and the reasoning if that was to go up or down.
Okay, just a clarification. So is the bonus based on savings over what the estimated savings were, or is the bonus based on what the realized savings, what the total realized savings were? So is the delta between what I expected it to be and what it was, or was it just that at the end of a year, my 28 jobs in my portfolio, in total average 25% savings, so I get $150 per MMBTU.
Good question. So the savings are what was expected from the model, so you already got paid for, versus what actually happened. Now, if you do the simple audit, you're going to get less incentive up front, but you had less hassle getting that incentive. So there's a much greater chance that you'll have a significant bonus payment. You just have to wait a year or so to get it. If you're doing the modeled savings, and Paul made this point already, we're not trying to hold back a bunch of those savings and give them to you later. We're just trying to see, are you within the ballpark of what we predicted? Because that's going to tell us something about the model, or something about the contractor, or something about how the contractor is using the model.
Well, if you can't see it, if you take the audit, simple audit, it's holding back like what, 40%? Holding back a lot of money for a year. So it seems like most
On a typical home.
on a typical home. So that might not be too attractive, but you can't see that. I read it carefully, and they're holding back a substantial amount of money if you take the audit path one. They're holding back very little money. They're not holding back hardly anything if you take the energy model audit.
Now, one reason for that is that if there are contractors who are outside mass save and they want to test the waters, then the simple audit gives them a way to come in, and where they might be getting no incentive right now, they can be getting some incentive without having to do the full-blown energy model. But we would hope that over time they would progress to doing the full-blown energy model because there's more upfront funding to do that. Also, there may be customer situations where it doesn't make sense, or there are other things going on. So we figured having these two approaches allows you to treat more houses, or to have a broader array of contractors and contractor business models that might work. We'll see how it plays out. Okay, so that's what we had on the two approaches. Next slide. To the audit. We thought it was also worth giving you a quick update on where we are in the process, and then we really want to open it to the floor. So, is that the next slide?
That is the next slide.
Okay, so yes. So things that we are working on that we haven't finalized yet. Again, this is something that we've been interested in for a while in the department, and that we discussed with the working group. The state residential conservation services regulations allow for fuel switching in residential homes. And for various reasons, financial reasons, economic development reasons, and climate change mitigation reasons, we are interested in promoting fuel switching for some customers and some fuels. Currently, though, the mass save programs, they are fuel neutral, which is why you can serve oil customers or propane customers. But they're not really able to actively promote fuel switching. So we want to really work on how would we quantify savings in a situation where you're taking a home that is primarily heated with oil or propane, and instead of putting a more efficient oil boiler in there, or putting a new propane furnace in there, you're switching them off of that fossil fuel to a different fuel. It could be a partial switch where you're putting an air source heat pump or several air source heat pumps into an oil heated home and leaving the oil heating system there. Or it could be a complete switch where you're saying we're going to disconnect the oil boiler and put in a pellet boiler or some other system to replace that. We're also aware that more and more homes are looking at particularly solar PV and to a lesser extent solar thermal, and that adding those systems are going to change the load on the home too. So when you're looking at a change in total MMBTUs before and after, those renewable systems are going to have a big impact on that as well. So we haven't figured out exactly how we would deal with those situations in terms of savings. It's not as straightforward as putting insulation in the attic or the walls and reducing the load. But we would very much like to make that alternative open to you. There's nothing to stop the pilot working now without these options, but we figure if we can give you more options to offer to customers, that's better. And so that's an innovation wants test.
Just one thing, if people have questions, maybe you can repeat them, Ian. At least I have a hard time hearing them.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
And then next slide. In terms of next steps, what we're working on right now is procuring the vendors that are going to operate the program. So much like the HES program now, we're going to need a lead vendor who's going to be managing the data. They're going to play a different role than the lead vendor at HES in that they're not organizing auditors in the same way. We're going to be selecting software providers to provide the audit software, the back-end management software. We're going to be selecting QA, QC providers. Our preference is for a team. So there are various combinations of software and lead vendor and QA, QC provider. But obviously there's some working experience within those realms. And so we are putting out that RFP in the very near future. And once we've done that and we've selected the team, at that point we'll be able to tell contractors, okay, this is who will be the lead vendor, this is the audit software that will be being used. And our thought was that it's only fair to be able to tell you all that before any contractors are making any commitments to participating or not. So you would know what audit tool or tools you have available to you and who you would be working with. So that's where we are in that process. Once we've done that, next slide, then we'll be moving quickly to contractor selection. We've heard interest from contractors from across the various groupings, inside mass save, outside mass save, IICs and HPCs. So we want to be very clear that this is open to any contractor. That said, we will assume that contractors will have to have BPI or equivalent certification. We'll have the same CORI background checks. We'll have very similar criteria to participating that you would see in the HES program. And we'll have a minimum field experience requirement. So I think that's something that everybody in this room will be able to clear easily. But we don't necessarily want somebody who's just started their business last week jumping into a pilot that then might impact the broader population of contractors.
What's the equivalent to BPI?
I mean, if you are ResNet certified or have a passive house or can show us that you have building science expertise, then I think we would consider all those things. We'll document that before you have to make that decision. Yeah, we recognize that most people will use the BPI certification. And then if we're only going to be able to offer this to a limited number of contractors because we're only anticipating funding 400 to 600 homes over the course of the pilot. And particularly now that we've heard that contractors can't be in mass save and in the pilot at the same time, we recognize that contractors have to be able to do enough work to make it worth their while to be in the program. So we're anticipating less than 10 contractors in the pilot, or around about 10. We were thinking 8 to 12. Now that we've heard the mass save decision on this, then we may even shrink that slightly further. There's a balance because we want a variety of contractors and a variety of geographic coverage, but at the same time we want there to be enough work that it's worth a while to get involved.
Is that 400 per year or for the 2 years?
Across the 2 years. But I mean, if we get to 600 homes in 15 months, then we can end early. Or we can say this is going great and we can look for additional resources. The funding that we have right now allows us to do 400 to 600 homes.
The average contractor does about 125 a year. So if you're gonna run out, that's gonna eat up a lot. One guy is gonna eat up a lot of homes in a year.
Yeah, I mean, that's a factor. So expecting that we might be oversubscribed, we've been discussing how we would handle that. Again, can't read it very clearly here, but we will be looking at geographic coverage, but beyond that, we probably will just have a lottery system on the grounds that that's probably the fairest way to select if there is a large oversubscription. If folks have thoughts on that, we're willing to take input, but we figured that that was the most even-handed way to do it, assuming you meet the criteria. Okay, I think that pretty much wraps it up for our presentation. We have at least an hour for those of you that have questions and comments. If you do have a question, I'm going to try to alternate between the floor and the webinar, and I'll probably repeat your question so the folks on the webinar can hear what's being said. So,
Who's eligible? Are municipal electric customers eligible for the program?
so the question was, are municipal electric customers eligible for the program? That's a great question, and the answer is yes. Because these funds are coming from a state funding source and not from ratepayer funds or REGI funds, then we can offer those services everywhere in the state. So yes, you can serve customers in municipal towns that don't get mass state coverage. Any questions?
Yeah, a couple have been answered already. Essentially, the slides will be available after the presentation. If we can continue to remember to repeat people's questions so they can hear them, that would be helpful. And then this is a question, is the whole house incentive range fixed between 3440 and 4300, or are those just examples?
Yeah, so the question was, is the whole house incentive fixed in the range that we had on the slide? And those were just examples. The incentive is going to be based on what work is done, what measures are done, and then what MMBTU savings the model predicts are going to come from that work. Okay, back to the floor.
And the contract is tied house to house with model. You want to use the recent tie model or the more extensive model?
So the question was, can the contractor decide whether to use the simple model or the energy model on a house-by-house basis? And the answer is yes, although again, if we see that it's, if there's deliberate gaming over time, then we'll revisit that. So I could see someone saying, well, if it's a big house, I'm going to model it. If it's a small house, I'm going to do the fixed savings. We're fine with that unless it becomes a situation where the scope of work that they're doing is producing substantially less savings. So yes, to the extent that it doesn't harm the program. Any other questions online?
Yeah, this person has several questions, so we can go through each one separately. Couldn't pilot program contractors be tricking the model to look worse than the actual MMBTUs used by the home, so the savings look bigger than what they actually are?
So the question was, could a contractor be tricking the model to make the savings look bigger than they actually are? And the answer is always yes. Contractors are very good at gaming the model when they have a strong incentive to game the model. So yes, it could happen, and that's large part why we're going to be collecting the billing data to compare against. I don't think we could do this pilot without that, and that's why that's a requirement. So yes, you may be able to do that, and someone might choose to do that for a number of homes, but eventually we're going to be able to catch up on that, and we'll see it in the results coming through.
And one other point is that some of the software we looked at in preparing the RFP, you're able to calibrate the software with existing usage. So that would also, to a large extent, prevent gaming the system. And it will also give more accurate answers in terms of what kind of savings you might expect.
Who's putting in the existing usage?
So we'll be collecting existing usage, but some of the audit programs have entry so that if you have the existing usage when you're doing the audit, you can enter it right there, and it will use that to influence the modeling of the savings.
So I was just thinking about that in the lead vendor to input that data.
I think if you can get it as the contractor, then we'd ask the contractor to do it.
So then kind of full control over existing and who's collecting then the
Well, but the lead vendor will be collecting the account information so we can track before and after. And we'll be able to look at it, and you'll be able to look at it. So that you won't be able to game what that utility data looks like.
That's interesting.
Can you say something interesting?
One thing that's interesting is they can get historical data, so you could actually get results in 6 months. The customer will have to agree to let you access their utility information, so you can get their usage from a year or two back. So you could do something now, and in 6 months you get the results. So you don't really have to wait a year to understand how well you did. And in terms of gaming the system, you're only going to make about approximately $100. If you use the modeling approach, if you can study the Strapa book, you'll see that there is no incentive, very little incentive. The best you can do is maybe $150 if you do super well. Is that right?
But the accuracy of the pilot is how substantial is the accuracy?
Yeah, we'll find out over time whether the software model program that we use is accurate or not, based on the balance of results.
Will all the gaming in the system be eliminated by giving the incentive to the customer and not the contractor?
I don't think so.
No?
Because either way it's going to influence how much the contractor is receiving for the work, because the contractor is setting the price. So I don't think it makes a difference.
And you mentioned earlier, though, that you would hope the incentive would affect the cost over the customer.
Right.
But that's not mandatory.
No, but we will be, but that brings up another point. We will be requiring that contractors give us the total cost of the project, because we will need that for cost effectiveness evaluation. So as well as having to get the customer billing data, you'll also have to tell us and show us what the total cost of the project will be. And in QA/QC, we'll be asking customers to verify that as we go. Okay, question back right.
So just like a simple audit process, is it a percentage of the cost of the job and then capital value
Yeah, so the question was, with the simple audit, is it a percentage of the cost of the job and then capped, or do you just get the capped amount? So the intent is that where the project is doing what I would call a full installation, then you just get the total amount. If we had the example of a wall insulation job, if the existing condition is that there's no insulation in the walls and you insulate the walls, then you'd automatically get the capped amount of $1,000. Correct. If it's a situation where there's partial insulation already, like you're doing attic work and there's already insulation in the attic and you're topping it up, then we may need to have a sliding scale for that. But we're trying to keep it as simple as possible on the grounds that if you have a home and there's no insulation in the home, then clearly the savings should bring insulation in the home.
Okay, so a continuation of the other question. I think we've answered some of these, but I'll just read them anyway. Where is the existing usage coming from? Are we supposed to be getting oil fill-up quantities, electric propane usage from clients, or is it all based off the modeled MMBTUs, which could be largely skewed compared to what the home is using?
Yeah.
So
The question was, where is the energy usage information coming from? And it's a question that we had already about what do we do with oil-heated homes or propane-heated homes. So again, just to reiterate, we'll be asking contractors to collect that information from the customer. Recognize that that won't always be easy. If you're not able to get it from the customer, we'll, as a minimum, require that you can provide who the provider is, the oil provider or the propane provider, and we will follow up with them to try and get that data. And then there will be an opt-out for the contractor to say, please don't include this home in my performance sample if they're worried that it's not good data. But then on the flip side, the lead vendor will have the option of saying you can't include that home in your portfolio if there are similar concerns about the accuracy of the data.
Is that a customer requirement that they have to provide their usage data?
It is. To get the incentive, the customer will have to provide their usage data. So the question was, is it a requirement of the program to get that? And I think there may be customers that don't want to share their electric or gas data, in which case I think you would have to say, this pilot program is not for you. You can always go to the HES program and call Mass Save and go that way. Question?
Question. Can you go back to the very beginning, just for sheer transparency purposes, and tell us how many people you have actually sitting on the DOER working group and who they are?
Okay, so the question was, can we share who is sitting on the contract working group and how many people?
How many people and who they are? Are they contractors? Are they, who are they?
So the contract working group isn't working anymore, but it was. Okay, so
designing the pilot.
So I would, rather than reading out a list of names right now, I will check if they're comfortable sharing that information. But what I can tell you right now is, I think it was 10, and it was a mix of program administrators, contractors inside Mass Save, contractors outside Mass Save, and a hose rater.
And I think that there will be a report published. I think they're listed in the back of the report.
Yeah. Yeah, we hope to put out the reports soon, and I think we thank them all. So it's not intended to be a big secret. Can you elaborate on your concerns?
The question is, for contractors that you have that are sitting on the DOER working group that helped you design this pilot, is the intent that those contractors are now going to be able to reap the financial reward of participating in the pilot program itself, or are you excluding those contractors from being able to work in the pilot because that would seem to be a conflict of interest?
Okay, so the question was, will contractors who served on the residential contractor working group be eligible or excluded from participating in the pilot? And we will treat them the same as any contractors who are not on the working group. So if they meet the minimum criteria, then they'll be eligible. But if we're oversubscribed, they'll go into a lottery the same way that any other contractor would. I think that's the best way to ensure that there's no perception of insider dealing or whatever that might be. Any more?
Yeah, there's more questions. How are MMBTU savings handled at the 12-month mark if the homeowner changes usage, gets a hot tub, pool, etc., or if the property is sold, or is it a rental and a new tenant moves in, the usage is out of the contractor's hands in those scenarios?
Okay. So the question was, what happens in the unusual situation where a home gets sold, or they install a hot tub, or it's a rental situation and the occupant changes. So we recognize that there are always going to be changes in these homes. And that's one reason why we're asking for a sample of at least 20 homes for the incentive. But I think we will also have a set of exemptions. So if as a contractor you identify a situation that is, if the home burns down, or if it's completely vacated, or they remodel and add 2 stories, then those will be grounds for excluding that home from the sample. If it's a more minor change, then we will say it has to stay in the sample, which is the point of having 20 or more homes. So this evens out. There'll be some net gains and some net losses based on occupant behavior. But the idea is that with a large enough group of homes, your performance as a contractor will come through in that average result. Okay, back to the room, and there's a question. The guy.
What were the contractors you use in the program will do weekly on work or later on?
Sorry, could you say that again?
All the contractors you choose, you said maybe 6 or 8 contractors, they're all going to do the same amount of jobs throughout the pilot, or?
So the question was, assuming we pick 6 to 8 contractors, are they all going to do the same amount of jobs? And the answer is no. It's going to depend on the contractor and their business model, how many homes they serve. Yeah.
Ian, do you think we're looking for blocks of 20? You might want to divide it up into 20s, because if I'm an independent, not involved in anything, just doing 20 wouldn't be a problem. I think you're concerned about there being enough work for a contractor to choose to be involved. Would that mean leaving the Mass Save program to participate? Who are you trying to, get to do the work? Because if you're looking for samples of 20, it might be a good way to chop it up.
So the suggestion is considering offering participation in blocks of 20 in the pilot on the grounds that's the minimum size. At this point, we're not anticipating doing that. I think we'd probably ask contractors to forecast roughly how many projects they would do in a year. But I don't think we would want to do it in blocks of 20.
Get a bigger sample of contractors and different styles and ideas.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of thing that I think a year in we could look at, or 6 months in, if we're seeing a skewing. If one contractor's done 300 projects and there's not a lot left for the rest, then that's something we'd look at. But that's not our intent at the outset to do it that way. Online.
Next question. Let's see. What is a major benefit of using this model over the current Mass Save model? Why are you trying to change the program payouts and incentives so substantially in using projected MMBTUs compared to realized MMBTUs?
So the question was, what's the major benefit in this approach versus the current Mass Save HES approach? And why are we trying to...
using projected MMBTUs compared to realized MMBTUs. Why are we truing it up at the end?
Right. Why are we doing a true up of projected savings versus realized savings through evaluation? Is that?
Yep.
So, I mean, we're interested in looking at this kind of performance-based approach of you get the incentive based on savings, in part because we're seeing that more and more of the industry is going this way in other states. And ultimately, the goal of the program is to put ratepayer funds towards saving energy for customers. So the theoretical argument is that this closes that circle more quickly because you're getting quicker feedback on what bill savings people are seeing in response to the efficiency work that's being done. I think at this stage in the pilot, we don't know if that's better than the current approach of HES, which takes a longer view and a larger sample to look at realize savings. But we won't ever know unless we try it, and so we see this as a good opportunity to try it. Question in the room?
Yeah, if you could confirm, I think there was a little confusion as to how customers are going to be coming into this pilot. Is that going to be derived through DOER, or are the contractors expected to bring the customers into the pilot?
So the question was, how are customers going to get enrolled in the pilot? Is it going to be through DOER centrally, or are the contractors going to go and find those customers? And the answer is that contractors are going to have to go and find those customers. We're not going to have a central call center and centralized marketing in the same way as the HES program does. The onus will be on contractors to find customers interested in participating. We recognize that that model is more the way that home performance contractors and contractors outside of Mass Save operate in terms of identifying their own customers. But in moving towards a more contractor-centric model, we think that's an essential part of that process.
Okay, next one. How is ventilation considered in this model?
So the question is, how is ventilation considered in this model? That's an excellent question because there could be an incentive with this EM&V savings to try and reduce ventilation rates in people's homes. So I think that's something that we will keep on our to be thought about list. I think if we'll make it part of the QA/QC approach to check on potential ventilation problems. I think that's already a best practice in the Mass Save program. We want to ensure that homes are not underventilated as a result of the program. I'm assuming that most contractors wouldn't want their customers to have a worse indoor air quality outcome as a result of the work, but I think we need to have some kind of safeguard in place. If folks have expertise in that area, we're open to input on that. Okay, guy in the middle.
Is there a list of approved measures, and our addicts going to be up to our body?
So what was the first part of that?
Is there a list of approved measures of what you will do and will not do as far as?
So the question is there a list of approved measures, and will addicts be up to R49? No, there will not be a list of approved measures. You can come up with the suite of offerings for the customer that you would like. I think that the current suite of approved measures in Mass Save are obvious measures that you would look at and use because time has shown that they're effective in both terms of cost effectiveness and performance. But the intent of this is to give contractors more flexibility so that you can offer more alternatives. We will be asking the QA/QC folks to look for potential problems. So if someone's employing measures that we think have moisture risk or other building science side effects, then we will be very quick to identify those. But we think that it's more likely to result in you presenting a better solution to the home than a worse solution to the home. And so in terms of is it up to R49? It's up to whatever you and the customer decide you want to go to. Well,
their work will have to pull permits, so automatically we have to follow the state's requirements.
Yes, okay. So that's a very useful caveat. Yes, so it will be difficult to go less than code, and we would certainly not want anybody to go less than code in doing this work.
Perhaps as part of the QA process, they can verify that a permit's been issued and that it's signed off, final inspection as part of the QA, because that is required by Mass law for insulation projects. So we should be following the laws in this pilot program.
So the comment was about pulling a permit for any insulation work in the state, and obviously we'll be asking all contractors to follow the legal requirements of doing work in Massachusetts. So at present, you're right, permits are required for all insulation work. There have been discussions at the Board of Building Regulations and Standards about situations where insulation work could be done without a permit in certain circumstances, and that was the case for a few months, and then the board stepped back from that. So whatever the prevailing legal requirements are will be expected from any program. And any more questions online?
There's several more. Here's one. Installing a poly vapor barrier to a crawl space does nothing to improve energy savings, but it is needed to prevent moisture, mildew, mold in a home. Same goes for venting bathroom fans through the roof, soffit vents, soft roof vents, proper vents. All are costs to the home energy upgrade, but deliver no energy savings. Skipping these measures will lead to mildew, mold, blah, 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 and other health benefits. So I guess the question is, are we going to be doing those things? Or maybe this is a continuation of that question.
Yeah, so the questioner is raising a list of things that are essentially best practice to avoid durability problems in the home, whether that's having a vapor barrier in a crawl space or soffit vents or other measures that are a cost to the contractor but aren't generating energy savings. And yes, I think, again, just like the existing programs, we'll be looking for best practices in terms of making sure that we're doing nothing to harm the durability of the home. And so that will be a big part of the QA/QC. And if need be, we can put that in the program manual, the sort of requirements there. Again, this is part of the trust but verify approach. We're going to trust that contractors in this program understand the building science and know what they're doing and are trying their best to serve customers well. But if in our verification we see examples where that's not happening, then that will be grounds for sanctioning those contractors. Question back. So the question was, what is the QA/QC percentage? At the outset, our thought is that we would use the same approach that the HES program takes right now. And so it will be a set percentage that may vary over time based on the performance of the contract.
Do you know what that set percentage is?
You could tell us?
Well, no, I know for HES, I didn't know if you were.
Well, we were planning to use the same percentage as HES.
So we do up to 60% through our lead vendor, and then do an additional 10% through a third-party QA/QC vendor.
Right. So what I am reliably informed by Eversource is that 60% QA/QC through the lead vendor and an additional 10% through a third-party QA/QC vendor. So that is what we will use to begin with, on the grounds that there's good reason behind the numbers that you have.
Well, wait a minute, hold on a second. That doesn't make any sense, because one of your goals is to, you want to attract these contractors, and one of the main reasons why people aren't involved in this program is they don't like all this oversight, they don't like all this inspections. When we began the HPC program 6 years ago, they said we'd only get 10% inspections, and now we have 90% sometimes. So I don't understand how you can have 60%. I mean, why would anybody do this if they're going to get the same amount of hassle as they have in the program?
So the question is, why would anybody participate in a pilot if they're going to get the same amount of hassle as in the program? And I think it's a fair point, but I think that from the outset we have to start with the same approach. And if we're seeing data, I mean, this is part of the point about getting rapid feedback on performance. If we're seeing data that suggests that we can reduce those percentages, then we can do that. But I don't think we can start with the premise that we can do this with less inspections. Now, we'll be bearing the cost of that to start with, But I recognize that there is a hassle factor component. Online?
Yeah, another question. Are contractors who sign on required to participate for the full 2 years, or can it be a shorter time frame?
The question is, if you sign on for the pilot, do you have to stay in the pilot for 2 years, or can it be a shorter time frame? And the answer is that it can be a shorter time frame. 2 years is sort of the maximum extent of time that we can guarantee having the pilot at this point. But if somebody does this for 6 months and decides they want to leave, then that can happen. We'll probably look to replace with another contractor, but that will depend on how the project is going. In the room, in the hat.
Tell me, how does the process work from start to finish? So do I just supply my job, and go do the job, bill it, and then that's the first time you bill it?
Okay, so the question was, can we describe the process from start to finish in terms of can the contractor identify the customer, do the work, and then just bill for it, and that would be the first time we'd know about it? It's a great question. I think we will expect you to notify the lead vendor as soon as you've found a customer, just so that we know what address they are, and so we can notify the HES program that this customer is participating in the pilot. That said, we do not want to institute any significant delays in being able to serve that customer. So we have to figure that out with the HES program in terms of how quickly. Sorry? If they're in a muni, then it would be very rapid approval, or maybe we don't even need to use the word approval, but we would want to enter that household in our system right away, and then you can treat or work.
So there's notification, nothing about price or anything, just do the job?
Yeah, I mean, we'll need, before you can get your incentive, we'll need to know, be able to access the customer's utility data, and we'll need to know the total price and the scope of work. But yes, and again, if you look at the program in, say, Maine, it's very much along those lines. So in that sense, it is going to be, hopefully, a less burdensome process than the current one. Online?
Okay, if during a QC a detail is seen, I'm sorry, just move, somebody had another question. Okay, if during QC a detail is seen that requires fixing, will the contractor be required to return to the job and fix it? So presumably, you know, yes.
So the question is, if during a quality control visit, a problem is identified by the quality control vendor, is the contractor required to come back and visit and fix it? And I would say the answer is yes, very much in the same way that it's required in the HES program now. That work was done by that contractor. It's their liability, it's their responsibility. So they would be notified and asked to come back and fix it.
So I kind of have a two-part question. So I think what you're trying to get is actual savings for these jobs and maybe come up with a more cost-effective measures to get installed. But why can't we get actual savings with the program that we're working with by just going to the customers and getting that information? In getting cost-effective measures, why isn't the best practices working group actively doing that right now? Why aren't we trying to solicit that group to get those measures?
So let me try and capture that. So I think the question is, if what we're trying to do in this pilot is compare modeled savings with actual bill savings, why can't we do that in the HES programs right now? So I can't really speak to the HES programs. There's obviously some work involved and some kinks to work out in terms of weather adjustment and so on. So for whatever reason, the HES program has chosen not to do that yet. Our thought is that with a pilot, it's relatively easy to try something new like that and test how effective it is. And then that gives information that the HES programs can use to say, okay, maybe we do want to try that, or maybe we don't want to try that, or if we are going to try that, we need to think about these things. So we're not trying to set up a rival to compete against the HES programs here. We're trying to allow for innovation in Massachusetts that may inform the programs. And that might be an example of something that, if it succeeds, the program might do in the future. But when you're serving so many customers right now with the HES program, it's difficult to just try that without having some sense of whether it's going to work or not. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. The other part, whose standards will the QA/QC follow when they're inspecting these jobs, especially if they're going to be doing stuff that isn't done now? Who's training those guys and what standards?
Okay, I'll allow a second question. This is a good question. The question is, who will be doing the QA/QC and what standards will they be using to judge things like what's building science best practice, maybe? Yeah, it's a good question. I think that we'll be looking for a very robust and skilled QA/QC team, because they're going to have to make more judgment calls maybe than you have to do in the HES program, where you're going to see very similar measures every time you go to an HES QC visit. We're hoping to see a wider variety of measures in this program. So we're aware of that, and that will influence our selection criteria. Obviously, we don't know the vendor at this point, but we will know that when the program starts. Okay.
Another question, it's sort of a follow-up to that, the question you just had, but it has to do with why aren't Mass Save projected and realized savings being measured to compare them to the pilot program? Which is a fair question. I mean, there are two different programs going on out there. Is there going to be any comparison between the two programs?
So the question is, are Mass Save projected and realized savings going to be compared against the pilot savings? That's a TBD. We would like to do that. I think that if we're going to compare the pilot results against the Mass Save HES results, then we're going to have to be very careful to make sure that it's, as to the extent possible, an apples-to-apples comparison. So if the pilot results in a lot of homes in a certain geography or a certain demographic or a certain home type, then we'll want to make sure that we're doing a fair comparison with similar homes in the HES program. So DOER is definitely interested in making that comparison. We assume that program administrators will be too, but we haven't really had that dialogue to figure that out. And I think as and when we do that, we want to make sure that we are doing that in a fair way. One way to do that is to have a third-party evaluator do that, and so that's been our proposal. At this point, is to hire a third-party evaluator so that it's not DOER deciding what the comparison group is. It's not an Eversource for a National Grid deciding what the comparison group is, but it's a third party that's trying to do a level comparison. And hopefully that's useful to everybody. Back in the room, and the guy in the front row.
Thank you. Is this strictly a retrofit, these incentives, or if customers go through renovations, are they also eligible for these incentives?
So the question is this strictly a retrofit, or are people doing renovations also eligible? The answer is that we want to make it broadly available, but with the caveat that we obviously don't want to overlap with new construction programs. So the nature of the program design is that you get paid for reducing total annual savings. And in most retrofit situations, you are increasing the space rather than decreasing the space. And so I think that's going to help contractors figure out where they're going to land with the project. It's not typical to retrofit a home and downsize the square footage. But if somebody is adding significant space, we would want them to go into the new construction program, comply with code, get the incentives from that. If they're retrofitting an existing footprint, then it's going to depend on the scope of that project, whether it's a better fit for a new construction major renovation program or for this program, but they would be eligible.
I guess my main question for like renovating a kitchen and, you know, you tear it down, the walls need to be insulated, is that customer going to be eligible for these incentives?
Yeah, okay, so if you renovate a kitchen and you're opening walls and you have the opportunity to insulate, is that customer going to be eligible? The answer is yes, but our incentive, that would probably have to be the modeled path. I don't see us being able to give them a fixed incentive for that. And so they'd have to show net energy savings. And they start at 5%. So if you're doing a modest renovation and it's not going to have, if it's only going to have a 2 or 3% change, then they're not going to get any incentive out of it. Anything online?
Yeah, I don't know, this is a question for the PAs. If you don't want to answer it, the person who asked the question can simply talk to you individually, but it's a reasonable question, I think. If a current Mass Save IIC drops out of the program early, that is this program, are they allowed to rejoin the Mass Save program immediately? I mean, have you thought that through, any of the PAs?
So does anybody, maybe Eversource, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think that our initial thoughts, there's still a lot of details that we need to learn about, but I think preliminarily our position is yes. If they no longer choose to participate in the geographic pilot and want to rejoin that state, we'll allow them to do so.
So just in case that wasn't audible, the answer was yes. If you are in the pilot but then choose to leave the pilot, you will be eligible to re-enter the HES program, although that's preliminary and there'll probably be more guidance. Okay, back to the room. Paul?
I see two potential problems here, and I have one concern. With regard to the contractor's question about approved measures, well, we don't have numbers for savings numbers for some of these new measures, like duct sealing, spray foam, flash and bat. I don't know how we can add additional measures if we don't have numbers for them. We don't, right? I don't think you do. Okay, so that's a problem.
I think some of the software we have, if you can say what the duct leakage was before and after.
Let's stop and
Okay.
treat that as a question. So
Sure.
The question was, where we have new measures, like flash and bat, which is not in the current program, or duct sealing, although I think duct sealing is coming into the current program, then how do we know what the savings are in the model?
Yeah.
And so again, that's going to be one of the factors we look at when we're selecting a software vendor, is that software tool able to accommodate a range of installations. And again, it may be a situation where a contractor that is doing a better than expected installation is going to outperform the model. So if the model wasn't able to handle that, or they're doing something that's better than the model is predicting, then they're going to hopefully perform better, and then they will have the opportunity to be compensated for that.
Second question I have, I don't see how this is going to last more than 6 months. The average contractor does 120 jobs a year. That means in 6 months he does 60. And if you have 6 contractors, that means you're going to do 360 jobs in 6 months. You're only planning on doing 400. So I don't understand how this is going to go more than 6 or 8 months. So I mean, that's something you got to figure out. Maybe. You can
So can I stop? So the question is that if the average contractor is doing 120 jobs a year, then the project is going to run out of projects or funding pretty quickly, maybe in 6 months, if we're only funding 400 to 600 projects. We're not sure in this pilot how many projects a year the contractors are going to do. I think there are contractors that are doing 120 jobs a year. I think there's also a lot of contractors who are doing less than that amount of work a year. It's possible that we get through we hit our 600 project limit in less than a year, and at that point or prior to that point, we'll have to address with the pilot community whether we're going to extend and find additional funding or just wrap up the pilot early. I think that we will be able to put some safeguards in place. So I'll take this back, but I would like to think we'd be able to say the pilot will run for a minimum of 1 year, not to exceed 2 years, and some kind of constraints on that. Or we may say contractors that have done more than 100 projects will be asked to consider leaving the pilot, going back to HES or outside HES, so that there's a chance to have more than, say, 3 contractors participate in the pilot. At the moment, we don't expect that to be a problem, but I think it's good to hear. And if other people think that most contractors are doing 120 projects a year, then we'd want to hear that. I think there certainly are high volume contractors, but there are also a lot of lower volume contractors.
The third thing I have, this is probably a concern of most of the contractors. And since I'm on the council and we're going to be reviewing the plan that the PAs come up with, it's an important question for me. So let's say that you're successful and you get really high actual savings, and that you get deeper savings, and then the cost of savings that are lower than what we're paying now. The question is, if this product does really good, do you see it that it would affect the current HES program? Would some of these ideas and some of these expectations and migrate to the HES program? That's really probably the most important question that people have.
Okay, so the question was, if the program is wildly successful and has cheaper savings, deeper savings,
Actually.
and then do we expect that this will influence the HES program? So yes, but with a caveat. So if the pilot program is wildly successful, I think we'd be very happy with that. That would be a good outcome for Massachusetts. And hopefully there will be lots of lessons learned that are relevant to the HES programs. The caveat I would add, though, is that the pilot is not radically different from programs that we're already seeing in places like Maine or Oregon. And so they are successful, effective programs, but we haven't seen them being wildly better than the program in Massachusetts. So our expectation is that there will be lessons learned, but our expectation is not that this model will be dramatically better than the current HES program. Also, the other caveat I would say is that we've heard from those places that they only are able at the moment to reach a certain scale. And so I think that's another consideration in terms of what translates over into the HES program in the future versus maybe staying as a separate choice. And we're open to more than one model in the programs in the future. Okay, anything online?
Yeah, this is a question. How will the cost of the project be integrated into the savings of work done? Using spray foam is costly, and if the customer pays thousands of dollars for the work, will the payback be considered in the savings?
Okay, so the question is about if you choose more expensive materials to do the work, how will that be incorporated in terms of increasing the cost of the project? So one of the advantages, I think, of this program is that the contractor and the customer can choose that. And hopefully the contractor and the customer are both aware where you're choosing a more expensive solution, that that's a conscious choice. And we want customers and contractors to have that choice. But we will be asking for total project costs and the list of measures installed so that we can be looking at the cost effectiveness of those measures, and that can be used to inform the program going forwards. Our hope is that more expensive measures will also lead to better quality of work, but it won't be a one-to-one. So there may be useful findings in terms of where does it make sense, where does it not make sense to do that. But it will be allowed in the plan. Okay, back to the room.
Just kind of more comments and anything. It's kind of like going backwards instead of forwards in my mind because of the old program. was an open market. It was not fixed pricing. Contractors charged whatever they wanted. Contractors said they did things, but they never actually did. The program failed, miserably. So, same idea, going back 6 years. So and there was also little to no oversight. So, I know initially you said that that was one of the things you were trying to reduce because you don't want to have a lot of inspections, and inspections are essential for any program.
Yeah, it's a good comment. So the comment, I'm going to try and characterize it, is that this new pilot is essentially going back to the way the program was done many years ago when there wasn't fixed pricing and there was less oversight. And is this really testing something new or just testing something old? I think we recognize that there's a cycle to some of these things, and yes, going to open pricing is something that we've done in the past. It's also something that's done in the present in a lot of other places, and it may prove to not be as effective. Effective, I would put in quotes because there's different interpretations of what that means. But we do see it as probably enough time has elapsed with a fixed pricing model that we're going to learn something from testing an open pricing model again. I don't want to proclaim that we think that's better. We don't think that's better. We think that's different, and we want to learn whether that can be as effective, less effective, or more effective. And in terms of inspections, we want to start out with the same level of inspection, recognizing that won't please everybody, so that isn't an incentive for people to try and avoid doing good work. Online?
Okay, so...
and just actually, I'm just going to pause and say it's now after 4 o'clock. We've been doing this for a while. If any of you want to go home, it's completely understood. We have the room until 4:30, so we can stay here, but you shouldn't feel obliged to sit it out if you have other things to do.
So I'll just ask this question. What if a customer has already captured a $2,000 rebate for the attic, another $2,000 for the wall, and they qualify for incentive? Would they qualify for incentive if the customer now wants to replace the attic with spray foam insulation? Wouldn't this be wasteful? I mean, it's a hypothetical situation where they've done all the work. Now they want to take rid of it and put in spray foam.
So the question is about a situation where a home's already received incentives through Mass Save, but now wants to do a different scope of work. So one of the reasons why we'll be asking contractors to enter the address of the home right away is that we want to have the chance to share those addresses with the Mass Save HES program. And if somebody's recently had work done through Mass Save, then they won't be eligible for the pilot. If they haven't done work recently, or if the program doesn't have a record of installation work, then the project can proceed, but the contractor is obviously in a situation where if it's already an insulated attic and they're changing the insulation in the attic, they're unlikely to get a lot of savings. So that's a disincentive to the contractor from doing work in that house in the pilot. So our hope is that that will be sufficient to avoid this being a common situation. And it's also something that would probably trigger a QA/QC inspection if we're seeing very little change in the savings from the project. Okay.
I got a few more questions.
Oh, Paul, I'm going to give someone else a chance just because. Go ahead.
I have a question about the expanded heat loan. So if for the purposes of the pilot, the expanded heat loan is going to mirror what we're offering for the heat loan now, is that going to cover financing for weatherization and HVAC and other measures, or is that strictly going to be weatherization? And then also, will you be doing any verification visits or quality control, for example?
So the question was about the financing and using the expanded heat loan to substitute for the existing heat loan? And specifically, will it cover things beyond weatherization like HVAC systems and so on? And so our plan is that, yes, it would be a sort of direct substitute for the mass safe heat loan, even for things like HVAC measures, because our assumption is that those customers would not be eligible for a regular heat loan unless they've gone through the HES program audit. So if they're participating in the pilot, then they're excluded from the regular mass safe heat loan, and so we want to give them back the same opportunity. So they might be installing a heating system and doing weatherization installation work and getting a mass safe incentive rebate on their heating system, but they would still be eligible for all of those measures to go in the expanded heat loan. There'll be a new category in the expanded heat loan.
And will there be QC on or verification?
Oh, and the verification, we would model it on the existing heat loan process. And the expanded heat loan uses similar vendors, and so that would be very straightforward to do. Okay.
Quick question. Just a quick question online. Do we have anyone signed up for this already?
The question was, do we have any contractors signed up for this already? A number of contractors have reached out and said they're interested in participating, but we're not going to enroll anybody until we've completed the selection process for the vendors, the lead vendor, the software vendor, the QA/QC vendor, and then we'll come back to the broad contractor community and say, this is the program, these are the vendors, we're accepting contractor applications starting X date with a cutoff date of X date, and then we'll see how many people apply and if we need to go to a lottery, and then we'll do that in as transparent a way as we can, recognizing the potential for concern about how people were selected. So,
I got just two other questions. So I see another issue. The fixed incentive model you're offering $1,000 for walls. I mean, some walls are, some wall jobs are small and some are big. And we're getting paid by the square foot, so I don't understand how $1,000 makes any sense. So what do you do about that? Are you going to give them $1,000, and it doesn't seem to matter what size, how many square feet there are?
yeah, so the question is about the simple audit prescriptive flat incentive of $1,000 for walls. So this is being done in Maine right now, although I think they have a $700 incentive for walls. Their average home is slightly smaller. If you, in the simple audit, identify that there's no current insulation in the wall and that you're going to insulate the wall, then you'll qualify for that full $1,000 incentive. If it's a small house or if it's a big house. Again, the safeguard that we have, apart from QA/QC, is that we will be tracking the billing data before and after. And if over time we're seeing that that's just not resulting in the level of savings we'd expect, then we may have to modify the savings, or we may have to go to that specific contractor and say, it looks like you're systematically picking smaller homes, and we can deal with it on an individual contractor basis. But at the outset, we'd like to have a very simple approach and offer that, recognizing that there's a little bit of risk.
The other question I have is about customer and customer confusion and being fair to the customer. Now, it seems to me that the customer would need to know that they have the option of getting a fixed price as opposed to some market price. So it seems to me that it would be important for the customer to be presented with an understanding or a document that stated that they understand that there are mass save programs out there and it's fixed pricing, and that these prices that are being charged could be significantly more. So what do you?
My question, answer that. Should that just go after the muni customers?
Well, yeah, you could. But
yeah. So
now, what you do with people
in?
Let me answer this.
So let me restate the question. So the question was, in the pilot, it's going to be open pricing, and in HES, there's fixed pricing. And shouldn't we make sure that customers are aware that there's choice? And I think that's a fair question. I also, at the same time, would say there's a significant budget for statewide marketing, for Mass Save, for HES. And so there's a reasonable expectation that after a number of years of this program, that homeowners interested in upgrading their house are reasonably familiar with the Mass Save program. And so I don't think there needs to be too much expectation on the contractor to say, you have an alternative that is Mass Save HES. I think
a lot of customers are ignorant of the Mass Save program, so I think if I was a customer and I got charged by Rob here, 50% more than
100%.
than what I would pay with the Mass Save, and then I find out, 6 months later, the Mass Save program, same work done for 50% less, I think I'd be kind of upset. And I want some money back from Rob.
I think you'd probably get better results.
Yeah, so that is what happens with an open market program, okay? So yes, we recognize that there's that risk, and we're willing to take it.
Why can't you just get the customer to sign a document that says he understands that he get it for a fixed price?
Well, I think it wouldn't be fair to say to someone participating in the pilot, you have to sign a release form. But then for someone participating in HES, you're not saying to them, by the way, there's also a custom program available that could offer you multiple different ways.
Well, that's a good idea, do that one too.
So
let everybody
then you end up with more paperwork in both programs.
But you're going to get customers that are going to be upset when they find out they had other options and they weren't told about that.
So I think that is a potential outcome of the pilot. I don't think we think there's a high risk there, but I think that is a risk. You can't try a pilot without running afoul of that opportunity. Are there any more online questions?
Yeah, let me just ask this one last one, and I guess what I would say is, I'll go with this one. First question, this guy. Presently the HES program offers free air sealing and no-cost vapor barriers and door weatherization, which is a big incentive. Is there anything like that in the pilot program to attract customers?
So the question is, the HES program offers free installation and door weatherization, and I would add lighting and instant savings measures. So we're going to have a flat incentive for air sealing that I think is going to allow contractors to offer it at low or very low cost, but it's not going to be quite the same as HES in terms of those guaranteed free measures. I think that there may be less of that kind of upfront incentive, and that may affect what type of customers come into the pilot. Okay, gentleman in the hat.
Ultimately, in the end, who's decided, I say this is a so what, in my already answered, say this is a so success. Ultimately, in the end, who decides that next 3 years?
That's a great question. So the question is, the pilot plays out, it's a reasonable success. Who decides what happens to the broader programs going forwards? And the answer is that the 3-year plans are written by the program administrators, by the utilities and the Cape Light Compact. They decide what they want to do with the programs. They bring their draft proposal in front of the council that Paul sits on and that we chair. We discuss, but the PAs are the authors of the plan. They may make modifications based on council input, but essentially they decide. So that's why I think if you're concerned about the disappearance of the HES program, you can probably sleep easier because the program administrators have the control. But we hopefully have a useful role to play in terms of testing innovation, soliciting other ideas, maybe providing information. Okay, I think we should try and cut this off. It's now 4:15. I'm getting tired, maybe you guys aren't. If there are other specific things that you want to ask us, we will send out the slides to everybody that registered for the webinar and to the list that was circulated inviting people to the meeting. And that will have our contact information on, and feel free to reach out to us going forwards. And then once the RFP is out in the street, we'll probably let people know. And then once we have vendors, we will definitely let people know, and we'll be looking to recruit contractors in the not too distant future. And thank you again for coming.
If you don't get any contractors.
Sorry?
If you don't get any contractors.
If we don't get any contractors, then we'll have to modify the pilot, I guess. There's been enough interest thus far that we're reasonably confident there'll be some. But, anyway, thank you. Thanks for coming in. Do you want to end the webinar? Or?
Yeah, I will, yeah. This,
Sorry? I am going to go pick up my children. It's unfortunate timing though. My wife found out earlier this week that she has to be out of state. Yes.
We are very warm.
We've been thinking about this.